This is a Ramana Maharshi self-knowledge satsang. We focus on self-knowledge since self-knowledge is what brings self-realization. This is the deep knowledge of who you are, not any kind of action. So I say, know yourself and be always free and at peace. Welcome. I'm Richard Clarke, and I'm hosting this satsang. I have followed Ramana Maharshi since 1990. Upon retirement, my wife Carol and I moved to Tiruvannamalai, home to Ramanashram. We lived there for 8 years and now live by Lake Chapala near Guadalajara, Mexico. In the U.S., I took satsang from Nome of Sat in Santa Cruz for many years. It was he that introduced me to Ramana Maharshi. He realized the self while in his teens through Ramana's self-inquiry, and after a few years of silence, has taught ever since. He's not well known because he has no interest in name or fame. He was not on the international guru circuit like some. He didn't think this was the best way to support a seeker's spiritual quest. I've offered this kind of satsang for more than 10 years, first in India, now in Mexico. I'm just a seeker like you. I have been blessed with deep teaching and practice. I just want to share what I love. Now, this is a picture of Ramana when he was about 21 years old. And to put these teachings into context, I want to give some background on Ramana Maharshi. His self-realization came when he was only 16 years old. He had the feeling one day that he was going to die. No one was home, and he decided then and there to get to the bottom of this. He lay down, closed his eyes, laid perfectly still, and stopped his breath. And he experienced something deep within that he later described as a current or force that he recognized as himself. He spontaneously saw that this was what was real about himself, and it was not the body and not the mind, but something deeper, something that was always there. When Ramana found this, he lost interest in school and his previous activities. Instead of studying, he would sit and meditate. His brother teased him, saying, "Why should someone who behaves thus retain all this?" Meaning, if you're so holy, you should go and live with the sadhus. Ramana agreed with his brother, and a few days later left his home and family, leaving a note that was signed this. Imagine getting a letter from your 16-year-old son signed this. Ramana journeyed to Arunachala in Tiruvannamalai, where he remained for the rest of his life. He spent the first 10 years in silence, no vows of silence, just sitting in silence. People became aware of the extraordinary youth meditating in the temple, and some were drawn to him. When he was 18, he was introduced to the great Advaita Vedanta books like Yoga Vishishta and Viveka Chudamani by Adi Shankara. He was introduced to these books by his attendant, Palanai Swami, who had checked them out from a local spiritual library and wanted help to understand them. Ramana spoke of his surprise to read in these books of his own direct experience. About 3 years later, there's a man, Shiva Prakasam Pillai, who had taken philosophy at the university and had already pondered over the deep mysteries of being. In 1900, he was appointed to a post in the Revenue Department. 2 years later, his work took him to Tiruvannamalai, where he heard of a young Swami on the hill. He was captivated by his very first visit and became a devotee. He put 14 questions to the Swami, and since the Swami was still maintaining silence, both the questions and the answers were in writing. He would write his questions on a slate, and the Swami would either reply on the slate or with his finger writing in the dirt. The book, Who Am I?, was first published about 20 years later and comes from written records of these questions and answers. They are the very first recorded teachings from Ramana, from his own experience and after reading the classics. Ramana gave these teachings when he was just 21, about the age where the photo you saw was taken. Now to the teaching. I use the all-text version of the Who Am I book, since this is the only version that was edited by Ramana himself. Ramana's words, paragraph 1 from Who Am I, the all-text version. Every living being longs always to be happy, untainted by sorrow, and everyone has the greatest love for himself, which is solely due to the fact that happiness is his real nature. Hence, in order to reside in that inherent and untainted happiness, which indeed he daily experiences when the mind is subdued in deep sleep, it is essential that he should know himself. For obtaining such knowledge, the inquiry, who am I, in quest for the self, is the best means. Now, these are my comments. Where does happiness come from? If we believe that happiness comes from things outside ourselves or from our thoughts and activities, then this is where we look. We all want to be happy and look for it wherever we think we will find it. When we realize that happiness really comes from within, it intensifies our desire for liberation and our spiritual practice. The wise say that the desires of the mind cloud and obscure our innate happiness. The desire clouds the mind. So when we get something desired, our mind is quiet for a while and we experience the happiness that we are. After a while, the mind becomes active again and the happiness is again obscured, as if by clouds. Ramana also uses again and again discussion of the three states, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, to talk about who we are. Who we are, we must always be. You are not one thing at one time and another at a different time. That's not your experience. So this includes all three states. He calls on the deep sleep state here, since during that state there is no mental activity, and this state is universally seen as one that is peaceful. We still exist, even in deep sleep. From where comes this sense of existence? Now some ideas for practice. Where does happiness come from? Look within yourself. There are outer events that might seem to bring happiness, but where is the happiness experienced? From where does it rise within you? What is your actual experience of this happiness? Is the deep experience of happiness any different with various kinds of happiness? Where does the sense of peace come from in deep sleep? If the mind is not active, then how can it be from the mind? And where does happiness come from? We all seek happiness. Where should we look to find it? Now, on to our videos for the week. First is Swami Sarvapryananda, and he is minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York and a fellow at Harvard Divinity School. Swami joined the Ramakrishna Math in 1994 and received sannyasin in 2004. He has served in many teaching roles, like in a monastic training center. Before coming to the U.S., he served in leadership and teaching roles at many levels: secondary school, teachers college, and the Vivekananda University. He follows a line of renowned resident Swami at the New York Vedanta Society, the first being Swami Vivekananda, who founded this society in 1894. Swami Sarvapryananda teaches Advaita Vedanta in a way that is clear and accessible to most listeners. I will use him frequently in these sessions. So now we have
this is from Behalf
Ananda
P.
versus
In
happiness.
Nirvana Shatakam, Adi Shankara says, I am neither the 7 materials of which the body is made, nor am I the 5 sheaths, physical, vital, mental, intellect, bliss. I am existence absolute, consciousness absolute, bliss absolute. I am he, I am he, I am he. The 2 statements mention bliss. It's negated once, but then bliss is accepted. Is it a contradiction? Pray, please clarify.
All right, this is a question about Ananda. The ultimate reality in Vedanta is called Satchidananda, existence absolute, consciousness absolute, bliss absolute. But when you say Ananda, bliss absolute, people immediately have a confusion or a wrong notion. They feel that so then there must be some kind of extraordinary happiness, bliss there. The answer is yes and no. The answer is both yes and no. Is it true that there is great joy in spiritual life of enlightenment? Certainly there is. But is it true that ultimate reality is a feeling of joy? No. No. Ananda is not another kind of feeling of joy. Maybe a very sublime, very nice happiness, great peace. No, not even that. It's beyond that. The way to understand it is like this. Sat, existence. Existence absolute is not a thing which exists. You see, a chair is a thing which exists. Table, light, earth, sky, these are things which exist. They are things. They exist. They are there. You can enumerate, list them out. You can point them out. A body is a thing that exists. Even inside the subtle things like thoughts, emotions, feelings, they also exist. No matter how for a brief while. So they are things which exist. They are different from each other. They come and go. They are distinguishable from each other. But existence itself is not a thing which exists. Immediately our mind will say, so it doesn't exist. So it is nothing. It's an immediate doubt which comes to our mind. If it's not a thing which exists, so it's nothing. No. It is the reality of all things. It is more real than things which exist. Let me ask you, a whole range of golden ornaments at Tiffany's, if you go there, that's real, right? They exist. They're better. You're paying so much for them. So they exist. But let me ask you, what's more real? Those necklaces and bracelets and tiaras, or the gold which is their substance, which is real? It's the gold which is real. You say, no, both. Not both. If both were real, you could have them separately. Can you have a tiara apart from the gold which constitutes it? No. It will disappear. The ornament disappears without the constituent substance. This lectern will disappear if you take the wood out of it. But the gold can exist without the tiara. Is that not true? It can exist as a lump of gold. It can exist as a necklace. It can exist as a bracelet. Different forms and names and forms come and go. The substance is one reality. Similarly, just use that example to understand existence. Just being. And it's not alien. It's really what you are. What we are trying to understand in the meditation earlier, that awareness, that is also the same as being. Now that being, which is us, it not only is, it's not a dark, dull existence. It shines. That shining of that existence is called Chaitanya, Chit, consciousness. That when it falls upon the mind and lights up the mind is the awareness which we are experiencing right now. We all feel we are conscious and aware, at least some of us are. You take a cup of coffee and you say, oh, I'm more aware now. You're not more aware. It's the mind which becomes more alert and therefore reflects awareness better, captures and channels this awareness better. You are the constant awareness. So consciousness is also not something that comes and goes. It's the mind which flickers, not consciousness itself. Just like consciousness is not a particular flickering of the mind, though it is behind all flickerings of the mind. Just as existence is not a particular existing thing, though it is behind the existence of every existing thing. Similarly, Ananda is not a particular flash of pleasure or bliss. It is the reality, it is the joy or the bliss which is experienced as all different pleasures of the world, all different happinesses of the world, all different fulfillment of the world. It is the source of all value, meaning, fulfillment in life. But in itself, it's not a particular feeling. I hope that makes sense. Again, let me reassure you, people get little, oh, so I can't experience it. What good is that then? Don't worry. The more spiritual we become, more we advance in spiritual life, the happier we will be. It's because it's the mind which reflects that Ananda better and better and better. A purer mind, a more spiritual mind reflects Ananda better, and therefore you are happier. Therefore the saint is very happy. There's a saying that Saint Teresa said, Saint Teresa of Avila, she said, a sad nun is a bad nun. We also say that. Why should a monk be unhappy? I remember when we were novices, we used to laugh and joke so much that I think an elderly gentleman who visited the ashram complained to the head, the abbot of the monastery, that they are these youngsters, they need to be disciplined. Okay. That story I'll tell you, yes. But this one, it had happened to us. And what the abbot replied, the head of our ashram, I can't repeat in polite company. So but the point being, why should these boys not be happy? They don't have your cares, of the world. So, but he put it in far cruder language. What you are referring to, Swami Turiyananda, it is a story. He was a very strict Vedantic monk. So the young monks in Belur Math, he heard one day in the next room, they were laughing and joking in the evening. And it was a sort of uproarious thing. So Swami Turiyananda went and scolded them. What are you so happy about? Have you become enlightened? Have you realized God? What's there to laugh so much about? And of course they were abashed and fell silent. It was just a senior Swami, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, and was stern. But luckily I think it's Swami Vijayananda who was there, who later started the Vedanta work in Argentina. So he was very... I had a ready wit. So he said, Swami, to Turiyanandaji, that when we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where Turiyananda himself is there in the book, we keep reading again and again, all laugh. And they're just laughing, jokes and laughing and humor. They're having an uproarious good time in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna. And then Turiyanandaji smiled and then she said, all right, you're right. All right, have fun, be happy. Yeah. As we go ahead in spiritual life, life becomes internally. I don't know, externally, whatever our karma is, that will continue. But a deep joy comes from within, a causeless joy. We're generally happy. That's there. So that will be there. But when Shankaracharya sings, Chidananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham, he means that absolute Ananda, of which Shankaracharya later in Taittiriya Upanishad commentary he says, all the joys in the world which men are mad after is just spray from the ocean of Ananda within each one of us.
Next will be Rupert Spira. Rupert Spira first came across the poetry of Rumi at the age of 15 in 1975. Then he learned sacred Sufi dance of movement, prayer, and meditation. Soon after this, he met his first teacher, Dr. Francis Rolls, from whom he learned mantra meditation and was introduced to the classical system of Advaita, or non-duality. This formed the foundation of his interest in practice. During that time, he read P.D. Ouspensky and learned Gurdjieff's movements. He studied the teachings of Ramana Maharshi and Nisargadatta Maharaj on an ongoing basis. A turning point came in his life in the mid-1990s. He was led to an American teacher, Robert Adams, who died 2 days after he arrived. However, while visiting, Rupert was told about another teacher, Francis Lucille. The first words Rupert heard Francis Lucille say were, meditation is a universal yes to everything. It was a pivotal moment in Rupert's life. At this moment, I realized that I had arrived home, that this encounter was the flowering and fulfillment of the previous 30 years of seeking. Over the next 12 years, Rupert explored with Francis the sense of separation as it appears in the mind in the form of beliefs, and more importantly, how it appears in the body as feelings of being located and limited. Francis also introduced Rupert to the direct path teachings of Krishna Menon and the tantric approach of Kashmir Shaivism. Of the essence of these years, Rupert writes, the greatest discovery in life is to discover our essential nature does not share the limits nor the destiny of the body and mind. And Rupert will talk about the urge for happiness.
About the qualities of awareness, would you say that there is any kind of interest from awareness's point of view to knowingly be itself, that it as such enjoys knowing itself? And I mean, as a true...
Yes. Yes, consciousness's knowing of itself is the experience of happiness. That's what happiness is. When you desire something, you desire it for the sake of happiness, yes? All desires are desires, whether it's for an object, a substance, a relationship, whatever. The real reason we desire the object is because of the happiness we hope to derive from it. Now, until we acquire the object or the relationship, we are not happy, yes? We are seeking happiness. At the moment we get the object, the activity of seeking comes to an end. Yeah, because we now have what we were seeking. Now, as soon as we get what we were seeking, we experience happiness. We think that the happiness experienced comes from the acquisition of the object. It doesn't. It comes from the cessation of seeking which preceded it. Now, the seeking that preceded the acquisition of the object is the activity of the finite mind. So when we get the object, the activity of the finite mind comes to an end. It's exactly the same thing that happens when we ask ourselves the question, am I aware? Before the answer yes has appeared. When we ask the question, am I aware? The finite mind comes to an end at the end of the thought. And when the finite mind comes to an end at the end of the thought, consciousness shines. Exactly the same thing happens when the seeking mind acquires its object. The seeking, that is the finite mind, comes briefly to an end and consciousness shines. The common name for that is happiness. The mind then wrongly attributes the happiness experienced to the acquisition of the object and then looks to repeat the experience by desiring another object. But the experience of happiness itself is always the shining of consciousness between two thoughts or perceptions.
And the urge to be happiness that we are is only from the point of view of an imaginary self.
Absolutely right. It's Jane Mary doesn't have to desire happiness because the knowing of her own being is the experience of peace and happiness. Mary is content with herself. When Mary's mind takes the form of Jane's finite mind, Mary's mind becomes limited, and therefore it no longer experiences the fullness of peace and happiness that is present in Mary's mind. Therefore, from Jane's point of view, her overriding feeling is one of unhappiness. Therefore, her primary activity in life is to find happiness, which she seeks through the acquisition of objects, substances, states of mind, and relationships. And of course, they all fail her. And then she engages this return journey, the path of self-investigation. She traces her way back to Mary's mind, and that is the experience of happiness. So yes, the desire for happiness is always from the point of view of the separate self. The separate self is the veiling, is the act. We could say this: the separate self is the activity which veils happiness. Because remember, the separate self is not an entity in its own right. There is no real self called Jane. Jane's mind is just the activity of Mary's mind. So Jane is an activity, not a self. The separate self is an activity. It is the activity of veiling happiness.
So then, if I feel an urge for inquiring, or because I somehow feel that happiness is not present,
Yes.
then it would be not a good idea to follow that urge, because
No,
it's
follow that urge, but instead of following it outwards towards the object, follow it inwards towards its source. So when you feel the urge for happiness, feel that urge is God's infinite being calling you back to itself. It is in fact God's infinite being calling you back to itself. So follow the call inwards rather than following it outwards towards the object.
But then it isn't the urge then from awareness, if it's a call?
No, it's not. Imagine a rubber band. If you take a rubber band and you stretch it, there is a natural impulse in the band to return it to its state of equilibrium. So Mary, it's like her mind is stretched. It moves away from itself and becomes Jane's mind. And therefore, in Jane's mind, from Jane's point of view, there is this gravitational force always pulling the rubber band, always pulling Jane's mind back to its source. Therefore, there's no such thing as a separate self that is not in search of happiness. The separate self is the search for happiness, the activity of seeking happiness. And the reason why all separate selves are motivated only by happiness is because in all separate selves feel this pull, this gravitational pull of their true nature, which is happiness. So all separate selves feel this desire for happiness. In fact, it's the desire to return to its source. But because the separate self cannot see or know its source, the separate self thinks, I must go towards the object to acquire happiness. In other words, you have this stretched rubber band. The rubber band thinks, if I can hook onto an object, I will relieve the tension inherent in this gravitational force. And it does hook onto the object, and it thinks, there's some rest there. But all that's happened is that the other end of the rubber band has been temporarily pinned onto an object and seems to have reached a state of equilibrium. But as soon as the object disappears, this gravitational pull is going to start acting again, and it's going to pull it backwards towards happiness. So as soon as you feel the impulse for happiness, now that you understand the mechanism, go take the direct path to happiness. Don't go the indirect path through objects. Take the direct path back to the source of your mind. You know, these retreats should come with a kind of a warning label on them. Because once we've understood what is being explained now, if we've really understood it, we can never again approach an object or a person expecting it or them to deliver happiness for us. Once we've understood this simple thing, we can never again demand that a person make us happy.
So that impulse cannot even arise as a habit.
No, the impulse does arise as a habit. As long as there is the feeling of being a separate self, that impulse, the desire for happiness, is inherent. It's not even inherent in the separate self, it is the separate self. The separate self is this tension, or this contraction, and this contraction is always seeking to relieve itself and go back to equilibrium. It does this through, you know, you have a glass of wine, and immediately the tension of the mind is temporarily relieved. That is an example of an object temporarily relieving the tension of unhappiness. But it lasts for 20 minutes. Soon as the effects have worn off, the tension of unhappiness is there again, motivating us towards another object. So once this is clear, once it becomes clear to us that no object, not even a gross object like food or tobacco or alcohol, but not even a fine object like the finest object, nirvikalpa samadhi, no object, no beautiful, exotic, expanded, meditative state of mind can ultimately give us what we want. So if we ever find ourselves going towards any kind of an object, be it a gross physical object, a mental state, anything with objective qualities, we are by definition just compounding our unhappiness.
Quite often it feels that this I would say trying to not reach for an object, but trying to trace back is also that trying is an object that I go to.
That's true.
I don't really...
That's true. Take your hand like this. Okay, now you squeeze your fist together. First of all, hold your hand like this. This is the natural state of your hand, yes? The natural, relaxed, open state of your hand, yeah? Now, clench your fist like this. Now, you have to use your imagination here. Imagine that you do this for an hour. You hold your fist tightly, squeezing as tight as you can for an hour, yeah? This will now seem to be the natural state of your hand. You will forget that you're making an effort, and you'll feel this is the natural state of your hand. Now, when I ask you to open your hand, you will feel that you have to make an effort. Yeah? Even now, open your hand and feel that a very slight effort is required.
Yes.
Yeah? It's not actually an effort. It's the relaxation of a previous effort of which, until that moment, you were unaware. So the effort to return the attention to its source, to begin with, seems to be an effort, but is in fact the relaxation of a previous effort of which we were unaware.
Yes, from the mind's point of view.
From the mind's point of view, it makes an effort. So make the effort. When the hand finally opens, there is this recognition, oh, I didn't have to make an effort to open my hand. I had to make an effort to maintain my closed hand. The closed hand is the contraction of the separate self. And we've been rehearsing the contraction of the separate self for so many years that we no longer notice that we're doing it, except for the experience of unhappiness. That is the hint. If it wasn't for unhappiness, the separate self would stay the separate self. But the experience of unhappiness tells the separate self something is missing, something is wrong. So there is this impulse in the separate self to find happiness, and from the point of view of the separate self, the clenched fist, the separate self feels that it has to make an effort to trace its mind back. It's like the effort we have to make to open the hand. When the mind traces its way all the way back to its source of consciousness, then we realize, oh no, I didn't have to make an effort to be consciousness. To be consciousness is actually effortless. I had to make an effort to be the mind. In fact, being aware of being aware, consciousness is knowing of its own being, is the only activity that is absolutely effortless. And this is why the sage Ashtavakra said, for the sage, even blinking is too much trouble. Even blinking requires more effort than being established in my true nature. And that is why true meditation is truly effortless. We cannot make an effort to meditate. But, you're quite right, from the point of view of the finite mind, it seems, to begin with, that we need to make the effort. In which case, make the effort.
And it seems that it is a fact that something is missing.
From the point of view of the separate self,
yeah.
it seems to be a fact. Yes, from the point of view of the separate self, something is missing.
So
the
it's
experience
not
of happiness.
taking it as a fact doesn't strengthen the separate self.
No, because the separate self cannot deny its desire for happiness. It cannot just say, that's an illusion, because the separate self's desire for happiness is its most real and urgent experience. Yes. So just going back to what we said about the effort we make in meditation, from the separate self's point of view, the separate self is what we are, and meditation is what we do. From consciousness's point of view, meditation is what we are, and the separate self is what we do. In other words, meditation from the point of view of consciousness is not an activity, it is just to be knowingly itself. That's why Ramana Maharshi said the highest meditation is simply to be. In the Christian tradition, it's called the practice of the presence of God. In Ouspensky's tradition, it was called self-remembering. Ramana Maharshi, sinking the mind into the heart. All these expressions are expressions of this being aware of being aware. Awareness of awareness. It's the essence of prayer, the essence of meditation, and it's the knowledge that all true philosophy springs from.
And now we will listen to Nome. The picture there is of a trip that Nome guided a group of us to Ramana Ashram in India. Nome is the guide dressed all in white, sitting near the left end. I'm the guy in the middle with the silly hat on, and that is Carol sitting next to me. Nome is my teacher of many years. It was he who introduced me to Ramana Maharshi and took Carol and me as a part of this group to Ramanashram in Tiruvannamalai, India, where we moved 2 years later. Nome teaches from the direct experience of the self, how to see and move past the limiting ideas you hold of yourself, and then consequentially of others and the world, and how to notice what is always there. With Nome, it's good to meditate along with him. What he is aiming for is you to experience what he is pointing to. Experience it and not just to think about it. Here, this video is called Inquire.
If only you abandon any tendency to misidentify with the body in any manner, or as an individual, an ego, you will find your very existence to be Brahman, of the nature of Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. This is without beginning and without an end. Unformed, unborn, imperishable, immutable, without condition or state, absolutely qualityless, transcendent of all that is perceptible and conceivable. The one who finds this in self-knowledge is himself the self-known. For there are not two selves. The self is only one. Therefore, with Sri Bhagavan's grace ever present, inquire profoundly to know what in truth you are. In this lies blissful immortality. In this, the reality comprehends itself. Brahman knows Brahman. Know the one self that you truly are. All differentiation is born of imagination. Put the question deeply to yourself. Who am I? Inquire into the nature of the inquirer. If you feel this is not yet realized, question within. Who does not realize? What is your actual existence? Or what is the nature of the innermost consciousness? It is unsensed and unconceived. Yet you exist. How do you know that you exist? Such knowledge is not dependent upon anything else. What is this invariable, self-known existence? Inquire, who am I?
And now for a few minutes of inquiry, and I will lead you. Just relax and sit in a comfortable position. Close your body. Take a couple of deep breaths. And notice that you exist. You exist, and you know that you exist without thought of it or sensing it. You exist, and you know that you exist. Then inquire, where does happiness come from? Is it from external objects or from within? What is the nature of happiness? Who am I? What is the nature of my existence? All right. Now let's close with a short chant. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Now, if this satsang was of interest to you, there are more resources, including a free book site, a YouTube site, and my blog. The URLs will be on the screen next, and there will be more of these satsangs in the coming weeks as we complete the series based on Ramana's small book, Who Am I? Thank you for watching today.